You're currently looking at an albino killer whale, something only captured on camera a handful of times. Here, in 2024, one is moving with its pod, its family, off the Shiritoko Peninsula in Hokkaido, Japan. But while this tranquil scene unfolds, something even rarer is about to be discovered. Far to the north, across the North Pacific, nearly 1,800 kilometers away on Bering Island, a team of researchers makes a far more unusual discovery. Severed dorsal fins from killer whales, torn free and bearing clear bite marks. But what creature could do that to one of the ocean's most formidable predators? Based on the bite marks, the answer is unsettling. Other killer whales. On their own, finds like this are difficult to interpret. They're rare, and the ocean doesn't often preserve enough evidence to reconstruct events clearly. But they don't exist in isolation. In 2018, researchers documented the first confirmed case of infanticide in killer whales. An adult male, assisted by his mother, targeted a newborn calf, separating it from its mother and repeatedly preventing it from surfacing until it drowned. What stands out is not just the behavior itself, but how it unfolded, sustained, coordinated, and tightly controlled. And when you start looking at killer whales through that lens, a pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Across very different contexts, their behavior isn't improvised. Whether they're hunting fish, sharks, whales, or even interacting within their own species, it follows a structured approach. So, the question is no longer just how intelligent killer whales are, it's what kind of hunters are they? And what are they truly capable of? To understand these creatures, it helps to step back and look at what a killer whale is. Despite the name, it isn't a whale, but the largest member of the dolphin family, part of a lineage that returned to the ocean roughly 50 million years ago, beginning with an early ancestor known as Pachycetus. Adult males can reach up to 9.8 meters in length, weigh around 5.5 tons, and travel at speeds of up to 56 kilometers per hour. They're large animals, but unusually maneuverable for their size. And yet, anatomy alone doesn't explain their success. What really defines killer whales is their social structure. They live in stable, long-term family groups, often centered around a matriarch, where individuals can remain together for life. These pods typically consist of 2 to 15 individuals, though they can temporarily combine into superpods numbering several dozen, sometimes over 70. Within these groups, behavior is shared. Hunting strategies, vocal dialects, and dietary preferences are passed between members and maintained over time. Occasionally, that behavior produces something less obviously useful. In 1987, a killer whale in the North Pacific was observed carrying a dead salmon on her head. Over the following weeks, the behavior spread throughout the group, persisted for a time, and then disappeared. In 2024, it briefly reappeared, this time in a juvenile male that would not have been alive during the original episode, suggesting the behavior was retained socially and passed on by older whales. It served no clear function though, and seemed less like instinct and more like a fad. So the behavior itself was likely trivial. The behavioral mechanism behind it, however, is not. Because once behavior can spread like that, it can also be refined. Which means that when we watch killer whales hunt, we're not just seeing individuals reacting in real time, we're seeing inherited strategies being put to work. In the North Pacific, resident killer whales feed primarily on salmon. They live in relatively large, stable groups and rely heavily on vocal communication during hunts. By contrast, big killer whales, often called transients, hunt marine mammals, including seals, dolphins, and even whales. Their groups are smaller, sometimes just 2 individuals, and they move more quietly, covering larger distances and relying on stealth rather than sound. So the differences between orca groups go well beyond diet. They extend to vocal behavior, movement patterns, social structure, and in many cases, strong reproductive isolation, even where ranges overlap. These are not short-term variations, they are stable, socially inherited traditions. So the hunt doesn't begin at the moment of attack, it begins much earlier, shaped and refined across generations. And you can see that most clearly in how orcas handle prey that should in theory be difficult to control. In Tisfjord, northern Norway, groups of killer whales feeding on wintering herring do not just chase individual fish. They use a cooperative hunting method called carousel feeding, driving entire schools of fish upward into tight bores near the surface, then stunning them with tail slaps before feeding. This same principle also appears in very different environments. In Antarctica, killer whales have been repeatedly observed using wave washing. Here, groups align side by side, accelerate together, and generate a surge that breaks over an ice floe and washes a seal into the water. In one long-term study, killer whales were noted as being markedly more successful when they used wave washing against seals resting on ice. What matters in both cases is that the kill is prepared before it happens. The prey's options are narrowed first, and the strike comes later. And against dangerous prey, that same control becomes more exact. Along the South African coast, killer whales have repeatedly been linked to great white shark carcasses missing a very specific organ: the liver. In 2022, a predation event filmed near Mossel Bay showed the well-known pair, port and starboard, killing a juvenile great white shark in under 2 minutes. The shark was forced into a vulnerable position, likely inducing tonic immobility, before the liver was removed with remarkable speed. And this is not just a pair tactic. More recent footage has shown starboard hunting a great white alone, proof that at least one individual in the pair can carry out the method solo. Documentary footage has also presented a 60-year-old female named Sophia taking great whites with a different approach, a considerable ram to disable the shark before drowning it. So the details differ from one orca to another, but the pattern holds: a specific predator using a specific method to neutralize one of the ocean's most iconic hunters. Other elasmobranches are no safer. A 2024 paper analyzed 4 predation events on whale sharks in the Gulf of California. Across those attacks, killer whales repeatedly targeted the pelvic region and ventral side, causing heavy bleeding and gaining access to internal organs, especially, again, the liver. One adult male, Moctezuma, was involved in 3 of the 4 hunts, suggesting the possible existence of a specialized elasmobranch hunting group in the region. With baleen whales, the problem and the strategy changes again. In attacks on grey and humpback whale mother-calf pairs, the calf is often the target, while the mother is the main obstacle, the calf's only real defense. So the first task is separation, kidnapping. Once that happens, the attack becomes cumulative, ramming, biting, and repeated attempts to keep the calf from surfacing until it eventually drowns. And then, the scale of what killer whales are truly capable of becomes almost difficult to process. Because even blue whales, the largest animals ever known to have lived, are not beyond their reach. In the confirmed kills documented off southwestern Australia, orcas did not rely on a single decisive strike. They applied prolonged, coordinated pressure, targeting vulnerable areas and repeatedly forcing the whale underwater until it could no longer escape or breathe. These attacks on blue whales can last from minutes to hours and often involve groups of 50 or more killer whales. Different prey require different techniques, but the broader principle remains the same. Killer whales overcome the problems their prey present. If killer whale behavior were only about killing, they would already be remarkable enough. But not everything they do appears to be strictly functional. Some behaviors look more like experimentation or even short-lived social fads. We've already seen one example of this in the salmon hat behavior, where a simple action spread through a pod, disappeared, and then resurfaced decades later. And that's not an isolated case. Along the Iberian coast, repeated interactions of orcas with boats, particularly targeting rudders, have been documented in the hundreds since 2020. In a small number of these cases, interactions have even led to vessels sinking, and the underlying cause still remains uncertain. One hypothesis centers around a female known as White Gladys, who may have initiated the behavior after a negative interaction with a vessel, possibly a collision or a similar aversive event, with the behavior then spreading socially throughout the pod. Other researchers interpret it more conservatively, as exploratory or play behavior. What matters though isn't just why it happens, but rather how it spreads. Because These interactions are not seen across the species, they are concentrated within specific groups, suggesting social transmission rather than independent emergence. Which means this isn't just fixed behavior, it's something that can propagate, persist, and change over time. And that same flexibility appears in more functional contexts. A 2025 paper documented northern resident killer whales associating with Pacific white-sided dolphins while foraging for Chinook salmon off British Columbia. Across hundreds of interactions, the whales repeatedly changed course to follow dolphins during active foraging, suggesting the dolphins were not incidental, but a source of information. The authors even proposed that the orcas may have been exploiting dolphin biosonar and search behavior to improve prey detection. And there is a clear payoff for both species involved. Killer whales catch large Chinook that dolphins cannot swallow whole. At the surface, the fish are torn apart and the dolphins feed on the remains. The authors even noted that there were no antagonistic interactions, suggesting a functional exchange. The dolphins help detect the prey, and the orcas secure it. So killer whales do not just pass down hunting strategies, they also pass down quirks, preferences, and short-lived traditions. And, when it helps, they can even incorporate another predator into the hunt. All in all, their intelligence is not rigid, but rather highly flexible. And this incredible flexibility seems to sometimes be turned inward. As I mentioned earlier, researchers documented in 2018 the first confirmed case of infanticide in killer whales. In a North Pacific population, an adult male, T068A, and his post-reproductive mother, T068, killed the newborn calf of an unrelated female, T046B. While the whole attack wasn't visible to researchers, the calf was likely drowned after being prevented from surfacing, while its mother tried and failed to intervene. The observing researchers did not interpret the attack as predation, but instead suggested it might be sexual selection. By killing a dependent calf, the male may have simply accelerated the mother's return to fertility. Now, it's one thing killing a conspecific, but evidence that killer whales might actually feed on their own kind remains far more fragmentary. There are, however, hints in older literature. Drawing on material collected between 1962 and 1974, V.I. Shevchenko reported that the remains of a killer whale had been found in the stomachs of 2 adult males from the same group, and suggested this may represent cannibalism. On its own, that is not definitive proof of active predation. Scavenging cannot be ruled out, but it does show that conspecific feeding had been raised in the literature long before the recent discoveries from Bering Island. In a 2026 paper, Olga Filatova and colleagues reported 2 separate discoveries from Bering Island. Dorsal fins found in 2022 and 2024, both bearing fresh tooth marks consistent with other killer whales. The first likely belonged to a juvenile. The second, larger one, likely came from an adult female or juvenile male. Genetic analysis identified both as resident killer whales. Consequently, the authors proposed that mammal-eating Biggs killer whales may occasionally prey on sympatric resident killer whales, while also noting that scavenging could not be completely ruled out. But the pattern of the remains, the fresh tooth marks, and the fact that both fins were found only a few kilometers apart make the predation interpretation difficult to dismiss. And that raises a further possibility. Biggs killer whales move quietly, reducing vocal activity to avoid detection while hunting marine mammals. Resident killer whales, by contrast, are far more acoustically active while foraging on salmon. If those differences matter during encounters, then one group may be easier to detect long before it is even visible. One interpretation, and this is purely speculative, is that Biggs killer whales may be exploiting that contrast, using the acoustic activity of resident pods to detect vulnerable situations, smaller groups, isolated individuals, or even lost juveniles. Now, that isn't confirmed, but it is testable, and if it holds, it would help explain why resident killer whales live in such unusually large, stable, lifelong groups. Protection may be part of the answer. In other words, the only animal dangerous enough to shape killer whale social structure may be another killer whale. Seen in that context, the recent evidence of cannibalism no longer looks like a bizarre exception. Rather, it looks like an extension of the same system. The target changes, the method does not. One final note on their hunting. Despite everything we've covered, sharks, whales, even the possibility of predation on other orcas, there are no confirmed cases of wild killer whales killing humans. Encounters do happen. Swimmers, divers, and surfers have all found themselves in close proximity. But in the wild, attacks are vanishingly rare. Why that is, remains unclear. Humans may simply not match any established prey profile. Or crazier still, orcas may have all unanimously decided that we are non-prey. Either way, this creates a strange contradiction. Because for an animal capable of such precise and adaptable predation, humans seem to just fall outside of it. By now, it's clear we're not just looking at a predator. We're looking at an animal that can generate new behavior and pass it on. Carousel feeding, wave washing, liver targeting in sharks, even coordinated hunts on blue whales. None of these are fixed behaviors. They are learned, repeated, and preserved. And that matters, because once behavior works like that, there is no obvious boundary to what can become part of it. Infanticide and cannibalism do not sit outside that pattern. They are simply an extension of it, which raises a more unsettling possibility. For killer whales, predation may not be a fixed set of instincts at all, but a growing repertoire, one that can expand, adapt, and occasionally turn inward. Which means the question is no longer just, what can killer whales do? But rather, it's what might they learn to do next. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you had a whale of a time. More seriously though, if you enjoy these videos and want to learn more about animals, please consider liking this video and subscribing, and I'll make sure to have more videos out your way soon. Thank you so much again. Until next time, bye.
Roger, let me ask you one question. How in the hell do you lose a 500-pound fish? What?
I'm sorry, sir. I was just going to say that it's not a fish. It's a mammal.
Thank you, Miss Jacques Cousteau.